October 331 BC. The sun had barely crested the horizon over the dust-choked plains of northern Mesopotamia, and already the air seemed to vibrate with the tension of an approaching storm. On one side, a young Macedonian king, barely 25, stood at the head of an army forged in the fires of relentless conquest. On the other, the sprawling might of the Persian Empire commanded by Darius III, the so-called King of Kings, loomed like an unshakable mountain. Its sheer scale meant to crush any who dared oppose it. This was not just a battle for territory, it was a violent collision of worlds, the disciplined precision of the Greek phalanx confronting the overwhelming numbers and diverse cultures of the Achaemenid army. Alexander had already tested Persia's strength at Granicus and Issus, but Gaugamela was different. The terrain offered no natural choke points, no rivers or hills to blunt the Persian advantage. Here, on this wide, flat expanse, Darius had prepared a trap, a battlefield engineered to maximize the power of cavalry, war elephants, and scythed chariots. Yet Alexander's brilliance lay not only in audacity but in calculation. He approached the field with caution, observing, reading the enemy, waiting for the exact moment to turn a disadvantage into opportunity. Even now, scouts reported Persian cavalry on the horizon, a reminder that every step forward would test the limits of discipline, courage, and command. The Macedonian army, smaller but infinitely more cohesive, advanced with precision. Their phalanxes bristled with sarissas, lances longer than a man's height, ready to form a wall of steel. On the right, Alexander prepared his companions, the elite cavalry that would deliver the hammer blow. The stage was set, the stakes absolute. Victory here would shatter Persia's grip on the Near East and define Alexander's legacy forever. As the army stared across the plain, one truth was clear. This was more than a battle. It was a test of genius against grandeur, of strategy against scale, and the outcome would echo across history. Alexander's mind raced through possibilities, formations and contingencies, anticipating every move, every fear, every flaw in the Persian host. In this moment, on the eve of Gaugamela, the fate of empires hung in balance. The scene was set, the armies poised, and the first move of history's most famous confrontation was about to unfold, an encounter that would forever redefine the art of war. After securing the Mediterranean coast and Egypt, Alexander did not rush blindly into Mesopotamia. Instead, he paused, consolidating his conquests, fortifying supply lines, and denying Darius the ports that could sustain Persian naval operations. This methodical interlude was a study in patience. While it secured Alexander's rear and strengthened his army, it also gave Darius precious time to amass the vast resources of the Persian East. Bactrian horsemen, Sogdian archers, and Scythian cavalry, all hardened in the steppes and deserts, capable of overwhelming even a disciplined foe. By spring 331 BC, Alexander began his march from Egypt, sweeping northeast along the foothills of the Armenian mountains, a route chosen not for direct confrontation, but for strategic advantage. It offered cooler weather and abundant forage for his cavalry, while simultaneously surprising the Persians, who expected a direct descent down the Euphrates toward Babylon. When Alexander's army reached the Tigris in September, the river roared with swift currents and a fortified enemy bank. Yet Darius made a calculated choice. He would not contest the crossing. Instead, he invited Alexander into the wide plains of Gaugamela, where the Persian army could use its numerical superiority to devastating effect. The battlefield itself had been meticulously prepared. Gaugamela, the camel's house, was a flat alluvial plain, stripped of obstacles and levelled by Persian engineers. It was ideal terrain for scythed chariots, which required long, smooth runs to build deadly momentum. Iron caltrops were scattered along the approaches to slow Macedonian cavalry, funneling them into zones where Persian horsemen could strike. The plain stretched for nearly 6 kilometres, ensuring that the Persian line could overlap Alexander's flanks and attempt the classic double envelopment that had threatened so many before him. Even the heavens seemed to conspire in the psychological war. Babylonian cuneiform diaries recorded a total lunar eclipse on the 20th of September, interpreted by Alexander's soothsayers as the sun eclipsing the moon, Macedonia overcoming Persia. Days before the battle, the Persian camp reportedly panicked, while meteors streaked across the night sky. These signs, real or imagined, played into Alexander's hands, allowing him to exploit cracks in the morale of an empire that stretched from the Indus to the Aegean. Cautious and precise, Alexander established his camp 7 miles from the Persian line, resting his troops while conducting reconnaissance. Parmenion, veteran of the Macedonian Wars, urged a night attack, hoping to neutralize the Persians' numerical advantage. Alexander refused, famously declaring, "I will not steal my victory." This was not arrogance, it was calculation. The night attack would have left his men exhausted and scattered, while Darius's army, expecting such a move, would remain alert. At dawn, the Macedonians were rested. The Persians, tense and fatigued, would pay the price. The stage was perfectly set. Terrain, morale, and preparation had all been considered. Logistics were in order. Water, forage, and the careful placement of elite units ensured that every man, horse, and weapon would be ready for the trial to come. What followed would be a battle not won by brute force alone, but by a combination of planning, intelligence, and the audacity to exploit every subtle weakness of the enemy. As dawn broke over the Gaugamela plain, 2 armies faced each other, separated by miles of dust and tension. Understanding the outcome required more than numbers. It demanded a comprehension of structure, doctrine, and discipline. On one side, the Persian Empire, a vast, heterogeneous force whose very size was meant to intimidate. On the other, the Macedonian army, smaller but honed into a professional machine, optimized for flexibility, coordination, and shock. Darius III commanded the center of his empire's might. Around him, the elite immortals stood as guardians of the King of Kings, while 2,000 Greek mercenary hoplites reinforced the line. 15 war elephants, their role uncertain but psychologically potent, loomed behind them. Persian cavalry stretched along both wings, each unit a master of its regional warfare. On the left, Bactrians, Dahai, and Scythians, steppe warriors with heavy armour and devastating bows, were prepared to roll over any opposition. On the right, Syrian, Mesopotamian, Median, and Armenian horsemen, reinforced by Cappadocians, braced for a decisive charge. Across the front, 200 scythe chariots waited, sharpened to disrupt and terrorize the Macedonian phalanx. The sheer scale of this deployment threatened to envelop Alexander's forces entirely. The Macedonian army, though significantly smaller at roughly 47,000 men, was a marvel of combined arms design. The core phalanx, armed with sarissas reaching 6 meters, projected a dense wall of spears, each rank shielding the next. On the right, Alexander led the Companion Cavalry, his shock troops arrayed in a wedge designed to pierce enemy lines. Between the cavalry and phalanx, the hypaspists acted as mobile anchors, bridging gaps and reinforcing weak points. Screening the army were Agriani's javelin throwers, Cretan archers, and Thracian peltasts, whose mobility and range offset Persian numerical advantage. In comparison, the Macedonian formation relied not on mass alone, but on discipline and cohesion. Each component was designed to integrate seamlessly. The phalanx absorbed and fixed the enemy, the cavalry delivered concentrated strikes, and the light infantry neutralized threats like scythed chariots. Against the Persian polyglot army, which lacked uniform command beyond Darius himself, this coordination was decisive. The contrast was stark. Persian units were vast and individually formidable, but varied in training, cohesion, and loyalty. Macedonians were fewer, but their uniformity of training, doctrine, and command structure created a force far greater than the sum of its parts. The stage was no longer just a battlefield. It was a chessboard where superior organization and tactical ingenuity would decide the fate of empires. From this understanding, Alexander would craft maneuvers that exploited both the geography of the plain and the structural weaknesses of the Persian line. a strategy that would unfold with lethal precision in the coming hours. The plain of Gaugamela stretched endlessly, a canvas of dust and heat, offering no natural obstacles to slow the Persian cavalry. Alexander faced a dire problem. The Persian line was longer, heavier, and positioned to envelop his smaller army. To advance head-on would be suicide. Victory demanded not brute force, but the precision of geometry and timing, a discipline Alexander had honed since youth. He arranged his army in an oblique formation, a subtle but profound maneuver that would shape the battle to his advantage. The phalanx anchored the centre, while the wings angled slightly back, forming what would later be described as a hollow square or flat-topped diamond. These refused flanks prevented the Persians from sweeping around the Macedonian lines, creating a mobile fortress capable of reacting to encirclement. Behind the main line, a secondary reserve of infantry waited, ready to pivot, face about, and plug any breach the Persians might exploit. As the Macedonians advanced, Alexander initiated a controlled drift to the right, a movement that appeared tentative but was meticulously calculated. The purpose was twofold. First, to avoid the ground prepared for scythed chariots, and second, to force Darius to shift his own line laterally, introducing tension into the Persian formation. Step by step, the Macedonian right pressed toward the Persian left, subtly bending and stretching the enemy line. Each maneuver strained cohesion, widening microscopic gaps that Alexander would later exploit with devastating effect. This was not reckless movement. Every file, every company, every cavalry squadron had a specific role. The Companion Cavalry maintained the tip of the wedge, ready to strike a breach. Light infantry screened against chariot assaults, while the phalanx maintained a disciplined front, projecting both an unbroken wall and the flexibility to absorb shock. Alexander's genius lay not in chaos, but in shaping the battlefield so that the enemy's own strength would betray them. By the time the Persian cavalry noticed the oblique drift, the structural integrity of their wings was under stress. Bessus on the left had extended too far. Mazaeus on the right mirrored the movement. The Macedonian formation remained cohesive, yet constantly pressuring, turning the Persian numerical advantage into a liability. The geometry of survival was more than positioning. It was control of the flow of battle, forcing the enemy to fight on Alexander's terms, not theirs. From these initial movements, the battle would erupt in a series of violent interlocking phases, a struggle for the flanks, a test of discipline against scythed chariots, and the wedge that would strike directly at the heart of Darius's empire. The precision of deployment was the prelude to a crescendo of tactical brilliance that would echo through history. October 1st, 331 BC, dawned over the plains of Gaugamela, with a sun that would beat down mercilessly on two armies poised for annihilation. Alexander's oblique drift had already tested the cohesion of the Persian wings, and now the first violent encounters erupted along the flanks. On the Macedonian right, Alexander's Companion Cavalry collided with the elite Scythian and Bactrian horsemen, a whirlwind of steel and hooves. Outnumbered and pressed hard, the Macedonian cavalry relied on disciplined squad tactics, fighting in compact units that could respond quickly to the unpredictable charges of the steppe warriors. The clash was ferocious, but the Macedonians held, stabilizing their wing while stripping the Persian left of its strongest cavalry support. This engagement alone shifted the structural balance of the battlefield, weakening the connection between Bessus's cavalry and the central line of Darius. Simultaneously, Darius unleashed his trump card, the scythed chariots. 200 ironclad monsters surged forward, their blades meant to shred the Macedonian phalanx before the cavalry could reach them. Alexander's preparations, however, were meticulous. Agriani's javelin throwers and Balearic slingers opened fire, halting many of the chariots before they reached the lines. For the survivors, the phalanx executed the drill of active permeability, opening lanes to funnel the horses through harmlessly, while Hypaspis dispatched the crews. What was meant to terrorize instead became a demonstration of Macedonian discipline. The chariot charge failed completely, costing Darius both men and morale. As the battle unfolded, a critical opportunity appeared. The overextension of Bessus's left wing created a gap between Persian cavalry and the king's centre. Alexander seized the moment with ruthless precision. Wheeling his companion cavalry left, he formed a massive wedge, an embalen, and drove it directly into the vulnerable seam. Supported by hypaspists and the rightmost phalanx brigades, the Macedonians smashed through the Persian centre. Darius, confronted with the disintegration of his elite units, turned and fled. Panic rippled outward, collapsing the morale of the centre and setting the stage for total rout. Yet on the left, Parmenian's wing faced severe pressure. Mazaeus' Armenian and Cappadocian cavalry surged forward, pushing back the Thessalians in a desperate struggle. The Macedonian rear reserve, however, remained disciplined. When Persian units broke toward the baggage train, intent on looting and rescuing captured royalty, the rearguard pivoted and counterattacked. Chaos for the Persians, control for the Macedonians. The double phalanx system held firm, preventing what could have been a catastrophic collapse. Alexander now faced a choice: pursue Darius to annihilate the Achaemenid line, or stabilise the threatened left wing. The decision was strategic genius in real time. He turned back, reinforcing the left, and Mazaeus' forces collapsed under renewed pressure. By the end of the day, the Persian army was shattered. Darius escaped, but his empire teetered on the brink. The battle had been fought with precision, adaptability, and an understanding of both terrain and human psychology. Every maneuver had been calculated, every threat anticipated. The Macedonian army, though smaller, had converted discipline, cohesion, and timing into a weapon far deadlier than sheer numbers. The smoke of battle had barely cleared when the question of what truly happened at Gaugamela began to emerge, not from the dust of the plain, but from the pens of later historians. Our understanding comes through a veil of time, filtered through authors writing centuries after the clash, each with their own lens. Arrian, relying on the accounts of Ptolemy, presents the most methodical reconstruction, describing the wedge, the seam in the Persian line, and Alexander's decisive interventions with remarkable clarity. Curtius Rufus, however, adds a flourish of drama, emphasizing the panic, the chaos of the baggage train, and the personal heroism of Macedonian generals. Diodorus Siculus offers yet another perspective, sometimes conflicting on the timing of cavalry maneuvers and the extent of the Persian route. Parsing these sources reveals a pattern familiar to historians of antiquity. Numbers and details were often exaggerated to magnify triumphs or villainize opponents. Ancient accounts claim impossibly high casualties. Arrian reports 300,000 Persians killed, with only 100 Macedonians lost. Curtius Rufus offers a more conservative figure of 40,000 Persian dead. Modern scholarship, applying logistical analysis and battlefield realities, proposes a different scale: approximately 40,000 to 50,000 Persian casualties and 1,200 to 1,500 Macedonian dead, with thousands wounded. Even the lower estimates attest to the immense bloodshed and the ferocity of the fighting. Casualty figures, however, only hint at the battle's human dimension. Gaugamela was more than numbers. It was a systemic collapse of an empire's army under the weight of superior organisation, tactical foresight, and psychological pressure. The flight of Darius, the panic among diverse levies, and the disciplined response of Macedonian reserves all contributed to an outcome that no simple tally could capture. This historiographical lens also illuminates a broader truth. Gaugamela was as much a battle of perception as of force. Alexander's understanding of enemy psychology, how to exploit gaps, provoke fear, and manipulate the timing of his attacks, was crucial. The sources, while imperfect, consistently emphasize his ability to turn strategic insight into tactical execution. In doing so, they underscore that the Macedonian victory was not merely brute strength, it was a calculated orchestration of men, horses, and timing. From this analysis, one sees the stark contrast between raw numbers and operational mastery. The battle's legacy is thus twofold. It reveals the challenges of reconstructing ancient warfare and simultaneously demonstrates the precision and audacity of Alexander's command. As the dust settled over Gaugamela, the echoes of battle were more than just the groans of the wounded or the clamour of pursuit. They were the death knells of the Achaemenid Empire. Darius III had survived, but his authority was shattered. Fleeing eastward toward Ecbatana and then Bactria, he discovered that loyalty had become a brittle commodity. Governors and satraps abandoned him, and the empire's cohesion unravelled. His eventual murder at the hands of his cousin Bessus in 330 BC marked not just the fall of a king, but the effective end of Achaemenid political power. Alexander, by exacting punishment on Bessus, claimed both retribution and legitimacy, presenting himself as the rightful successor to the Persian throne. Victory at Gaugamela also unlocked the material wealth of an empire. Babylon, Susa, and ultimately Persepolis opened their gates, revealing treasuries overflowing with gold, silver, and precious commodities. This influx of wealth transformed the Macedonian state, funding campaigns deeper into Asia and ensuring that Alexander's army would never face the logistical fragility that had constrained earlier conquests. The capture of the Persian treasury did more than enrich Macedon. It symbolised the transfer of imperial power from east to west, from an ancient dynasty to a new Hellenistic order. Yet Gaugamela's significance extended beyond wealth and territory. It set in motion a cultural synthesis that would define the Near East for centuries. Greek administration, language, and artistic expression spread across a landscape long dominated by Persian systems. Cities like Alexandria would later emerge as centres of learning and commerce, their foundations laid by the very campaigns that had shattered Darius's empire. The Hellenistic age, with its fusion of Greek and Eastern traditions, had begun in earnest, and the political, economic, and cultural ripples would echo through history. Alexander's triumph demonstrated that genius in warfare is not simply measured in victories, but in the enduring consequences those victories create. By dismantling the Achaemenid military, securing critical treasure, and establishing the framework for cultural integration, he had reshaped an entire world. The Macedonian army's precision, his audacious tactics, and the psychological mastery displayed on the plains of Gaugamela ensured that Alexander's name would resonate long after the dust of the battlefield settled. The plains of Gaugamela bore witness not merely to a victory, but to the manifestation of Alexander's mind in motion. His triumph was not an accident of circumstance, nor the stroke of a mythical hand. It was the calculated result of foresight, timing, and audacious execution. Every manoeuvre, every repositioning, every calculated risk was designed to exploit the vulnerabilities of the Persian host and to magnify the strengths of his own army. Alexander's genius rested on three inseparable pillars. First, a symmetric manoeuvre. He refused to fight the battle Darius had meticulously prepared. By drifting his forces rightward and refusing his flanks, he neutralized the Persian numerical advantage, turned engineered obstacles into non-factors, and forced Darius to stretch his line beyond cohesion. Second, combined arms integration. The Macedonian phalanx absorbed the onslaught of scythed chariots, while the light infantry, archers and javelin throwers disrupted and thinned the enemy, all coordinated seamlessly with a devastating wedge of Companion Cavalry that struck directly at the Persian centre. Third, cognitive dominance. Alexander understood the psychology of command. By targeting Darius, he shattered the army's nerve, turning mass into chaos and collapse. The battle demonstrated a profound truth about leadership and warfare. A smaller, disciplined and cohesive force, guided by insight, flexibility and daring, could dismantle an empire's mightiest army. Every decision, from reconnaissance to the rejection of a night attack, from the oblique march to the final wedge, was executed with precision, timing, and situational awareness that set Alexander apart from every other commander in history. Gaugamela's outcome was not simply tactical, it was systemic. The flight of Darius initiated the disintegration of the Achaemenid Empire. The Macedonian phalanx held the line against overwhelming numbers, and Alexander's elite cavalry delivered the coup de grace that ensured total victory. The capture of the Persian treasury and the incorporation of vast territories into a new Hellenistic order were the tangible extensions of that brilliance. At the heart of it all lay the essence of Alexandrian genius, the ability to perceive opportunity in the chaos of war, to harmonize disparate elements of an army into a single instrument of precision, and to strike decisively at the critical point of the enemy's strength. Gaugamela stands not as a singular conquest, but as a timeless testament to strategy, audacity, and the human capacity to transform intellect into irresistible force. The Macedonian victory at Gaugamela in 331 BC did more than topple a king. It reshaped the political, cultural, and military landscape of the ancient world, leaving a legacy that echoes in every study of strategy, leadership, and the art of war. Alexander's genius was no myth. It was the ruthless, disciplined, and visionary orchestration of men, weapons, and timing, leaving a mark on history that has yet to be rivaled.